for this important program. Thank you and welcome also to those who are joining us on our live stream. We're so glad that you are here. Yesterday was the Trans Day of Remembrance. We had a very meaningful service here, and we wanted to make a weekend of it. We think that this is a cause worth highlighting. Trans struggles are very real. And today we get the pleasure of hearing some personal stories from our panelists. And we're so grateful that they are here with us today. So today's program will be in 3 parts. We will start out just making sure we are all on the same page with some vocabulary and just a brief overview of the trans rights movement. We will then hear personal stories from our panelists. And then, during the final 20 minutes or so, we are going to have an opportunity to ask some questions of the panelists. So you will see in your pews, at the end of the pews, some blank note cards. And you should have some pencils in your pew backs. So we encourage you, as you're listening to these stories or as you're listening to this Trans 101 presentation, if something comes up for you and you have a question, go ahead and write that down on your card. And when the question and answer time comes, we will have somebody collect those, and we will have a moderated question and answer time. So again, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to start with Morgan. Morgan was born into this congregation. There are 4 generations of her family attending church here. She is a church member. We are so happy to have her here. Of a special note, I think, are her artistic talents. I think that runs in the family as well. She has put together these slides, which look fantastic, but she also has put together a really meaningful presentation that I hope will teach us all a lot about trans vocabulary and a little bit of the trans movement. So without further ado, I kick it off to you.
Thank you so much, Tim. Such a lovely introduction. Hi, as most of you know, my name is Morgan Marie Abramson. I'm Gwen Abramson's daughter and the granddaughter of Wynn and Larry Davies. I've been coming to First Baptist since I was born in 1994. I'm also a woman who happens to be transgender. Many of you have watched me grow and change since coming out as trans in 2018. It feels somehow right on this Trans Day of Remembrance to be here with you all in a space where I spent much of the period of my life that I realized I was trans. I wish to share with you now a basic understanding of my community, our history, and why it matters. Excuse me, a little bit of nerves. And I hope I can reintroduce myself to you all, the real me, and not some mask or costume that I wore for years. I know it can be easy to get overwhelmed when we are learning about a group of people and their terminology, but please remember, the most important thing is simply keeping an open heart and a receptive mind. If you do that, no one will be angry at mistakes as long as you keep trying and learning. All right, transgender conversation. Chapter 1, gender, sex, and sexuality. Gender is a social construct. Transgender means someone whose gender identity is different than the sex they were assigned at birth. There is an estimated 1.4 to 2 million transgender people in the United States, which is likely a low estimate. Transgender is what we call an umbrella term, meaning that it includes under it a wide variety of identities, such as trans women and men, non-binary people, and genderqueer, fluid, or agender people. Cisgender means someone whose gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth. Trans and cis are Latin prefixes, meaning across from and on the same side as, such as transatlantic cruise. It's a useful distinguishing term similar to heterosexual versus homosexual. Gender dysphoria is a form of cognitive distress felt due to a misalignment of gender and biological sex. Gender euphoria is the opposite of this, and it is experienced due to finding alignment through transition socially or medically. Not all trans people experience dysphoria, which is a very important thing to understand. It is generally agreed in the fields of biology and psychology that although related, gender is a separate concept from biological sex. Rather than having to do with the body, gender is a collection of ideas behavioral patterns, as well as manners of dress and speech, which are attributed to us by society. These often vary from culture to culture, with the historical binary ideas of what a man or woman is and should do being very different around the world. The concept of man or woman is different from biologically male or female, and many people wish to change their gender or feel they fall outside this binary altogether, but we will touch more on the binary later. Gender has two primary components: gender identity, which is the gender we feel we are inside, and gender presentation or expression, which is how we present that gender to the world. Therefore, things like androgyny and drag are different than being trans. Those are a matter of presentation and expression rather than identity. Anyone, cis or trans, can be masculine, feminine, androgynous, or perform drag because identity and presentation are different things. Slide 2. Biological sex is fluid and changeable. Biological sex is a combination of chromosomes, hormones, and physical anatomy. According to experts, around 1.7% of the population is born with intersex traits, the same number as people born with red hair. Intersex people are born with sex characteristics that do not fit the typical binary notions of male or female bodies. Trans people can alter chromosomal and secondary sex if we wish as well through hormone replacement therapy, which is known as HRT for short, or gender confirmation surgeries, though not all trans people choose to pursue these. We've seen that gender is a social construct, but biologists also agree that biological sex is fluid. When we are in the womb, we all start with female chromosomes, and the Y is a later secondary addition. This is in fact why cis men all have nipples, despite not typically breastfeeding. In addition to this, many structures in the body are what are called homologous, meaning that they share an original form in utero, such as the clitoris and penis, or vulva and scrotum. In many creatures throughout nature, such as frogs and clownfish, sex can also switch under certain conditions. There is significant proof that the brain and body develop at different stages in utero and could easily develop in conflict with one another. I am of the opinion that chromosomes are not our sex, but merely a blueprint. And just like a house, we can decide to change our sex, just as you can change or improve the original design of a home. Trans and intersex people can be any sexuality. So sexuality is completely different from gender identity. And this is one of the most common misconceptions about the trans community going back decades. Trans people and the feelings that we have and how we express them do not arise from sexuality. These are two different things. A trans woman could be straight or lesbian. A trans man could be straight or gay. Any of us can be bi or pansexual, and, etc. And it's up to non-binary people to choose how they label their own sexuality with their partners. Just for example, a cis woman or a cis man dating a trans man or trans woman respectively, that would not change your sexuality at all. And in fact, many of us do date straight cis people, myself included. And I think that's actually one of the most unique things in the LGBTQ community about the trans community, is that we have this direct connection to the rest of society because we often date people in the rest of society. Trans and intersex people are unique in this way, in that we can be any sexuality. And there is an adage that says, sexuality is who we love, gender is who we are. And I think that really describes that difference quite effectively. Some trans people also choose to exclusively date other trans people for safety and or comfort. This is sometimes called being T for T, and it's a very personal decision that usually just arises from safety and comfort needs. I think it's important to note too that when we're attracted to a person, we're not, we're seeing them in clothes, we're seeing them in public, we know nothing about them. And attraction is really about a first impression, isn't it? So you could be attracted to any person on the street, and in fact, I guarantee you that at least one of the people you've been attracted to in your life was not born the biological sex that you maybe assumed they were. And that really doesn't change your attraction to them. We're all attracted to a whole person, their being and appearance. And if you think about it, anytime you are attracted to someone new, you really don't know what their birth sex is. Dating a trans person is really like dating anyone else. Chapter 2, the gender binary and pronouns. Trans men are men and trans women are women. The gender binary is the traditional binary of man and woman. Binary meaning here a system of two parts. Trans women are women who are assigned male at birth. Trans men are men who are assigned female at birth. Binary pronouns are she, her, hers, and he, him, his. Binary trans women and men should all be referred to with the same pronouns as our cis counterparts. The gender binary is the traditional system of two parts used to designate man or woman. Binary pronouns, I'm repeating myself, I apologize. So binary trans people should be seen and treated just the same as cis men and women. In some ways, trans men and trans women are the kind of more traditional side of the trans community. We're the ones who tend to get talked about in the news. We're the ones who tend to get focused on, but the trans community is much broader than that. And in some ways, when you're referring to trans men and trans women, that should make things more simple, because you're just dealing with a man or a woman like anyone else that you know. It's important to remember as well that we cannot always tell a person's gender by looking. If you don't know for certain, it's all right to ask, but only do so if you are certain that it doesn't risk outing someone against their wishes or making them uncomfortable. You know, trans people are often at very different points in our lives and transitions, and you're not suddenly more or less trans because you're further along than someone else or have made different choices than someone else about your appearance. And it's important to respect that what we're talking about here is not external. You know, we're not going through like a Sailor Moon transformation here and just becoming something else. The outside is merely changing to reflect what's already inside. And it's what's inside that we're respecting with pronouns. Getting comfortable with someone's new pronouns, taking the time to memorize and include your own pronouns in documents and emails is the first step to being a strong ally to the trans community. And I beg you, please, don't just include your pronouns in emails and documents, but try to be the change that we should see in your workplace, with your friends and family. You know, it really can start with you to normalize making this happen in society. You know, trans people can only go so far doing this. You know, cis people are always going to listen to other cis people more than you're going to listen to us. And that's what being an ally means. There are genders beyond the binary. Because gender is a social construct, there are many more genders than man or woman. And this has been true for thousands of years. Many cultures have third genders or more, such as the two-spirit individuals of indigenous American tribes. Given the diverse nature of non-binary identities, it is best to always ask the person what their identity is and how they wish to be referred to, rather than assume. Non-binary identities don't conform to just male or female, so using male-female pronouns simply doesn't make sense. They/them pronouns are the most universal non-binary pronouns, and the Oxford Dictionary traces published use of singular they pronouns as far back as 1375. Some non-binary people prefer different pronouns, which we call neopronouns, such as zir or fey-fair. Getting comfortable using and memorizing singular they pronouns or neopronouns is just as important as those of binary trans people. Non-binary people have been around just as long as binary trans people, and were often revered as sacred in various cultures. Singular they/them pronouns have been used in many famous works of literature, including those of William Shakespeare and Emily Dickinson. Non-binary people have been fighting for recognition for decades, and in particular, I'd like to highlight the work of non-binary authors and activists Kate Bornstein and Leslie Feinberg, who I would highly recommend looking into reading. They were writing, speaking, and doing television appearances about the subject all the way back in the 80s and 90s. There's incredible diversity in how non-binary people appear, identify, and label themselves. So asking is extremely important. If transgender is an umbrella term, so is non-binary, containing under it a multitude of other identities. All right, chapter 3, a brief transgender history. Transgender people have existed in every culture and time. I've included here today some images of historical trans figures. We have a Greek statue of the demigod Hermaphroditus, a transgender Roman emperor named Elagabalus. We have Joan d'Arc, two-spirit medics from indigenous American cultures, the Hijra from India, and the women of Le Carrousel from the 1950s San Francisco. There are ancient pottery shards from Egypt that list 3 genders. There are statues as far back as the Greco-Roman period of trans and intersex bodies, such as the trans demigoddess Hermaphroditus pictured here. The Roman emperor Elagabalus was a transgender woman. She was considered somewhat notorious, although most criticism did stem from her supposed perversion for her identity. She also attempted the world's first vaginoplasty thousands of years ago, which shows that medical trans science is ancient. It is not a modern phenomena. And not only that, but there is evidence of transgender priestesses of the god Dionysus taking pregnant cow urine or other herbs in order to hormonally transition. Joan of Arc was tried and killed by the church for wearing men's clothes and claiming a men's title. He or they have been talked about primarily in history, as many other likely trans figures have, with the wrong pronouns, when in all honesty, Joan of Arc was quite likely a trans man or a trans-masculine non-binary person. And this is a common problem throughout history, is that many figures who may have been trans are sort of erased and written off as, at most, kind of outlying gay and lesbian individuals. Pictured as well are two-spirit healers who carried the wounded to be cared for, and Hijra trans people in the early 1900s in India. And lastly, the image of the theater troupe here is of the trans women from San Francisco's Le Carrousel in 1959. Really, these are just a handful of historical examples, though countless more exist. If you're interested in learning more about transgender history, I suggest reading the excellent books Transgender Warriors by Leslie Feinberg and Susan Stryker's Transgender History. So, modern trans medicine started nearly 100 years ago. Particularly focusing in the 1900s, transgender science and medicine began before 1919 with the work of Magnus Hirschfeld, pictured here. Magnus Hirschfeld started a clinic called the Institute of Sexual Research in Tiergarten, Berlin. Hirschfeld here is pictured with 2 trans women, and Hirschfeld pioneered transgender hormone and surgical treatments and aided in securing updated identifying documents and passports. He was performing modern trans medicine and legal work over 100 years ago, but unfortunately was labeled a degenerate by the Nazi Party and was beaten almost to death and had his institute and library burned before fleeing the country. It went on to become one of the most famous images of Nazi book burnings, and I've included it right here. It's been in numerous history books. Among his patients was the painter Lily Elbe, who along with Dora Richter had the first vaginoplasty surgeries and went on to be the subject of the controversial film, The Danish Girl. Right there. Born in 1886, Lucy Hicks Anderson was a Black transgender woman who was a popular socialite, hostess, and chef, going on to take 2 husbands and dying rich in 1954. And that's her right there. Christine Jorgensen, over here, was a former US soldier born in 1926 and became one of the first trans celebrities, becoming a popular entertainer and talk show subject in America. Dr. Alan Hart, down here, was a trans man born in 1890 who pioneered using X-rays to detect tuberculosis and standardized modern TB screenings and is seen as a medical hero who saved thousands and thousands of lives. Michael Dillon, right there, was a trans man born in 1915 who served in the U.S. Navy as a physician and surgeon and was the first trans man to undergo a phalloplasty surgery. Wilmer Broadnax, bottom right here, was a black transgender man born in 1916 who was a popular gospel recording artist in a quartet with his brothers. Really, transgender science and medicine began with the work of Magnus Hirschfeld in a modern sense. And since then, we've seen numerous people take advantage of that medicine and really come into their own and blossom. And I hope that this gives you a sense that this is not some trend and it's not some modern phenomena, but that we are a people who have always been here and have been here and thriving for a long time. So, trans people sparked the broader LGBTQ plus movement. So here I really wanted to highlight some activist work in transgender history. On the far left, I have a photo of Compton's Cafeteria Riot. We have a photo of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, Brooke and Carmen Extravaganza from the film Paris is Burning, activist Miss Major, Kate Bornstein and Leslie Feinberg, who I've mentioned previously, and Carolyn Cossey and her husband, David Finch. Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera are considered pioneering trans activists and were present at the Stonewall Inn riots in 1969, sparking the first Pride and the modern queer rights movement. They also founded radical trans group STAR, which sought housing and employment for homeless trans youth. Also with them at Stonewall was Miss Major, who also went on to help enact major prison reform for trans women. Most people know this moment, the Stonewall Inn riots, as kind of the central moment that sparked Pride. It's what created Pride parades and Pride Month. But what a lot of people don't know is that 3 years before in San Francisco, at a place called Compton Cafeteria, a group of trans women rioted at their local meeting place there due to frequent arrests for female impersonation and being beaten and molested frequently by the police. This helped inspire the Stonewall riot, but is almost never talked about, simply because trans women were seen as less optically beneficial to the movement, because we've often been seen as so strange and outside the norm. But really, Compton's Cafeteria is what sparked the modern Pride movement, and it doesn't get that recognition. And this is a big part of our friction with the police department to the modern, going forward to the modern day, because really what people forget is that Pride and Stonewall and Compton's were a riot. They were very much like the riots we've seen in 2020. And it happened because people stood up and threw bricks at cops who were arresting us simply for the clothing that we wore. Filmed in the mid-'80s, Brooke and Carmen Extravaganza are trans women of the New York ball scene that would go on to inspire the popular Netflix show Pose. In this photo, they were at the beach celebrating being able to wear bathing suits after vaginoplasty. And I think it's really important, especially on such a somber holiday, to celebrate images of trans joy and thriving, because that's what we're working towards, and that's what our lives are. We are normal people, just like you, who thrive and have happiness. And I look at their faces in that photo, and it touches me. They're just happy to be themselves and free finally on that beach. Kate Bornstein and Leslie Feinberg, non-binary activists and authors, are shown here at a 1996 UCLA interview discussing trans and non-binary rights. They did multiple talk show appearances at the time, which is solid proof that the non-binary movement is not some new thing that we have to learn about. People have been identifying as non-binary for decades and centuries. Lastly, it was really important to me personally as a trans woman who often dates cis men, that I include a happy image of a trans woman and her husband, and they're still married 30 years later. Carolyn Cossey, in particular, had a very tough time because she was a popular actress and model. She was a Bond girl in an 80s Bond film, and was outed and lost her career. This sparked her anger so much that she went on to campaign the British court system to enact changes for trans people, and also did the talk show circuit in the 80s and was very famous for being on Arsenio Hall, Donahue, all of the kind of famous talk shows at the time. And those are easily searchable on YouTube if you'd like to look them up. And she's really talking about things that we're still talking about today, back at that time. All right. Chapter 4, where are we now and why does it matter? So we saw some progress in the Obama era. The Obama era saw the mainstreaming of trans people and trans rights with the rise of celebrities like Laverne Cox and Chaz Bono. This rise in awareness generated the current buzz around trans people in news and politics. Some progress has taken place since, with trans actors starring in a number of shows like Sense8, Euphoria, and Pose. The first trans pop star succeeded in Kim Petras, the rise of trans models in fashion, and the first trans White House political staffer, as Sarah McBride joined the Obama team and later joined the Delaware Senate. This paved the way for closeted celebrities like Elliot Page to come out as well, and many documentaries, as well as a high-profile Oprah interview with writer Janet Mock took place. All of this is good, but it has consequences. That attention caused more harm than good in the Trump and post-Trump era. We've seen transphobic celebrities such as J.K. Rowling and Dave Chappelle spreading hatred and/or misinformation about the community. And we've seen a huge rise in what we call trans-exclusionary radical feminists, or TERFs, attacking trans rights. On top of all of this, the increased attention has drawn violence. In particular, 2021 has been the deadliest year on record for trans people, as has every year sequentially since it has been tracked in 2013, meaning we are dying more and more every year. 45 people who are trans in this country were violently murdered for being trans this year. Violently murdered, often by people they know. So I just want a trigger warning here about violence and mental health. But despite moderate progress, most of the attention has benefited celebrities far more than the average trans person. We have seen the controversy around us spawn dozens of anti-trans bills written preventing us from playing sports, accessing hormones, or seeking care at shelters, not to mention our bathroom rights. 29% of us still live in poverty, as opposed to 11% of the general population. And all of our statistics per size of demographic are significantly larger than those of the average population. 27% of us have been fired or denied promotion due to workplace discrimination. I mean, how often do you see a trans person who's visibly trans who is a manager or a CEO? You don't see it. 54% of us have experienced violence, and 47% have been sexually assaulted. 22% of us have no health care coverage whatsoever. So, I wanted to end on that note because it is a sad holiday, and the vigil last night that we did was very touching, but it's extremely troubling to me that I am seeing my brothers and my sisters and my trans siblings in general around me struggling and dying, and it's happening every day. And visibility is great. Movies and TV shows are great, but who is it really benefiting? Is it benefiting us, the average trans people on the street, or is it benefiting actors and actresses and celebrities who really are sort of detached? And I think it's important to approach that with a tad bit of skepticism. But I'd like to end on a happy note, and so I wanted to thank you all and thank First Baptist Church, because this is the place where I grew up realizing I was trans. I've included here a picture of myself in Fellowship Hall, where I used to always try to wear the angel costume in the church play, because it very much felt like a pretty dress. And I would really like to thank my mom, because my mom has been my feminine archetype in my life and the gateway to the feminine for me. And my mom is the kind of woman that I want to be in my life. And without her, I would not be standing in front of you or anywhere today. So thank you, Mom. I love you very much. I also wanted to include a quote from a book that I thought was very fitting about how trans people fit into faith in general. It's from a book called Something That May Shock and may cause shock and disbelief. God blessed me by making me transgender for the same reason God made wheat but not bread and fruit but not wine, so that humanity might share in the act of creation. And I believe that with all of my heart. So thank you, everyone. This presentation has been, in many ways, a long time coming for me. I have known that I am trans a long time. I've known I gravitated to femininity as long as I can remember, and I realized what that meant when I was about 10 years old. I used to sit in these exact pews that you are in now and pray to God to make me a woman. I would sit there ashamed, sure that if anyone knew, they would think that I was a pervert or a freak. That fear came from crude jokes by classmates and adults. It came from transphobic movies like The Silence of the Lambs and Ace Ventura. It came from hearing nothing about people like me at school or church. That fear kept me in the closet until I was 24 years old. When I finally did come out, one of the few things that got me through was the love and support of my family. I'm sorry. All of this today is why this is so important to me, because I never want another child to ever go through what I went through again. I never want us to repeat these mistakes. I used to struggle to believe in a God that could curse me to such an existence. But I realized it's not God who hates, it's us, fallible humans. We trans people are living as God and the universe intended, and it's simply our job to catch up with that act of creation. Thank you.
Hello, my name is John W. Duncan, and I am Pastor Tim's husband. And I want to thank all of you all for being here today. I've had the opportunity to get to be with these people for about the past month, and I don't know any group of people that have so much love and want to show so much love to everyone if they're just willing to allow that. Right now we're going to go through a panelist, and we're going to hear some additional stories. We're going to start off with Wayne. Wayne sees himself and herself as an advocate for the cross-dressing community, as well as the larger trans community. Wayne.
Okay. Thank you, John. As John said, my name is Wayne. I self-identify as a heterosexual male crossdresser. I am a native of Wisconsin. I was born and raised in Richland County, which is roughly halfway between Madison and La Crosse, as the crow flies. I've known that I was interested in women's clothes since I was in kindergarten, but growing up male in the 1970s and the 1980s, you can kind of imagine that a person assigned male at birth expressing an interest in feminine clothes was really seen as definitely frowned upon, and definitely seen as not appropriate. So very early on, I learned that I had to hide my interest in anything feminine, and I had to avoid any mannerisms that would in any way be seen as effeminate, such as sitting with my knees crossed. In fact, I remember one time I was sitting like this on the school bus, and someone else said that that was definitely not appropriate. So I sat in the typical male fashion for decades. I wore my mom's clothes from time to time to satisfy my desire to wear feminine clothes. And the only other outlet I had was to admire the clothes that the women and girls around me were wearing, which actually I found to be a benefit when I started buying my own female wardrobe and used the observations of decades of looking at what women were wearing to fashion my own fashion sense, so to speak. I didn't buy my, and I kept myself closeted until right after my 33rd birthday in 1999. And if you do the math, you know that I am now 55 years old. When I bought my first pair of boots, of what is now probably in the neighborhood of 70 pairs of boots, I attended my first transgender support group in December of 1999. And I started volunteering at Outreach, which is the local LGBTQ plus community center, in the next year. I came out to my sister in the summer of 2000. I came out at work in October of 2000. Came out to my brother, I believe, in January of 2001. And I came out to my parents in October of 2001. So in the period of right around 2 years, I came out at work and to my immediate family. I anticipated when I first started coming out to myself, or at least acting on my own desires for feminine clothes, that it would take me months, if not years, before I would come out in public. And once I was able to get over the mental hurdle that I didn't have to pass as female in public to wear feminine clothes in public, it sort of took off. For those of you of us who are old enough to remember the old Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner cartoons on Looney Tunes, my coming out took off like the Roadrunner escaping the coyote. Sometimes with the flames going after him. So, I can say that having come out, I am a lot happier than I used to be. People who knew me before I came out and who know me now have told me that I am definitely a lot happier now than what I was before I came out. And I can definitely feel it, that suppressing my true self and my true nature was making me depressed and making me miserable. And now that I am able to dress as I want and express myself the way I want to, I am a whole lot happier than I ever was before. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Rhiannon. Rhiannon is actually a member here at First Baptist Church. She is also the co-chair of the Board of Outreach here. She has written and published 5 books over the past 10 years in a variety of literary genres. Rhiannon.
Thank you, John. guess a lot of you here in the sanctuary know me. I've been a member here for more than a decade now. Lived in the Madison area since the 70s. And a lot of you know that I'm a fully transitioned male to female trans woman. I want to let you know that I'm very happy to be here this morning, and I'm very happy that we're doing these events this weekend, but I'm just sort of very happy to be anywhere in a lot of ways these days, because some of you know, but not all of you know, about 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, I tried to take my own life. And sadly, that's a very common thing that happens in our community. I don't think Morgan shared this particular statistic in her presentation, but somewhere around 40% of our community at some point attempts suicide, and about half that number is successful. I want to let you know that I'm very happy that I was not successful in taking my own life, because shortly after that, my life started to pull together in some very positive ways, and I'm in a much better state now in a whole lot of ways. I started transitioning in the late 90s before I was even connected to this church. And I was aware that I was transgender from fairly early in my childhood. It was the sort of awareness that sort of grew over time, though. As I got into my teenage years and my adult years, I became more and more aware that this is who I am. And it became more and more of an ongoing interest for me to transition and to think about becoming fully female. As I said, I started transitioning in the late 90s. And the reason I started, sort of the impetus for starting transitioning, I had sought out some specialized counseling. Actually, I went up to the Twin Cities and to a clinic called the Program of Human Sexuality at the University of Minnesota. And they gave me a whole battery of tests, and they interviewed me, and they talked to me, and they said, you really ought to think about transitioning. This is who you are. And at that time, that was in the early 90s, I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. But then, in the late 90s, it began to dawn on me after I'd had yet another emotional breakdown and I was hospitalized. It began to dawn on me that I was self-destructing emotionally, and that if I didn't start transitioning, I wouldn't survive. And so I started a very long process with very few resources, which is fairly common in our community because, as Morgan mentioned, we really struggle, many of us, financially, and I had very few resources, so I was just sort of transitioning on a shoestring for a long time. And about 2007, 2008, I started coming here and attending at First Baptist, and I'm looking up at the stained glass windows because this was a great place for me to come. It's a very welcoming, positive environment for me and for many of us. And my faith is very important to me. I'm devoutly Christian. I often come here, and some of you know this, but not all of you know this. I often come here during the week, during the day alone, and sit in the sanctuary and I'll pray and I'll meditate. And just coming here, I calm down and I feel God's presence in a very immediate, powerful way. But sometimes that sort of connection between faith and being transgender doesn't always go so well in a lot of ways. And then you add in the fact that I've had a whole number of issues with mental illness over the years as well, which has fed into my hospitalizations. And I've struggled with poverty all my life, adulthood. It's been a struggle. As I said, I'm glad that I'm in a happier state now. One thing I should mention, though, being transgender in and of itself, it's not a mental illness. I've had other issues with depression and anxiety and other things going on with mental illness, but being transgender is not a mental illness. As I mentioned, I tried to take my own life about 3 years ago. But shortly after I had that attempt, my life started to really gain traction and things started to get a lot better. About 2.5 years ago, I was actually finally able to have my gender surgery, which was a major relief and a major point of happiness. And then my financial picture started to become a lot less strained and scary for me. And I started seeing a great therapist who really helped turn a lot of things around too. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I guess if you were to draw anything from my story, or maybe from some of the other stories too, I would say that diversity is all around us. And it gives a great interest and variety and positive, happy gifts to our world, and it also brings a greater depth and some unique outlooks that a lot of us can share that not everybody has, and it's to be valued. It's not to be dismissed or doubted or set aside. And the other thing too that I would hope that you would draw from my story is that sometimes life looks very bleak. It looks very scary. It looks very sad. And I think for a lot of us, we're in that position now, going through the pandemic and the economic struggles and the political upheaval. For a lot of us, life looks bleak. But that sun will come up the next day. There's always new opportunities. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Sunshine. She is a poet, an activist, an artist, and a drag queen. She wants to change the world through spreading love and kindness to herself and others, and to inspire others to be themselves and to be proud of themselves, as well as love and be kind to themselves.
Hello, my name is Sunshine, and I came out as trans on February 7th, a long time ago. I forgot the year. And I've always known that I was trans, and it took me a long time to really realize it. It took me a long time to really realize it and really love myself and take care of myself. But the moment that I started loving myself was the moment my life changed and got better, because growing up, I hated myself because I knew I was trans, but I was pretending to be somebody I wasn't. I was pretending to be a straight dude. The worst. I was pretending to be a straight dude, and I knew I wasn't that person. And it was making my life horrible. It was making me hate myself. It was making me not want to get out of bed. And for me, seeing other trans people be themselves is what helped me figure out who I was. Also through drag, it helped me figure out who I was. I started doing drag. When I came out as gay. I started doing drag, and I was doing drag because I was depressed, and I needed to go to a happy place. My happy place was going to drag shows and just having fun and just letting my hair down and just being around like-minded people. And being around those people made me realize, oh, I want to do drag myself. So I started doing drag myself. And for me, my happy place was drag, and my happy place was naming myself Sunshine. Because being out in the sun makes me happy. And I named myself Sunshine because I wanted to remind myself to be happy every day and to not let obstacles in life get to me and get me down. And so I named myself Sunshine. I started doing drag. And when I was doing drag, that made me realize, oh, I'm not just Sunshine as a drag queen. I'm Sunshine on a daily. Sunshine is not just part of me. Sunshine is who I am. And over time, my name became Sunshine Rainbow. And I have my own art business called Sunny Ray Creations. And I make art to inspire myself every day. But I make art to inspire others around me, to remind them to love themselves, to be kind to themselves. And one thing that I do for myself is every day I wake up, I look at myself in the mirror and I tell myself, I love you. And the reason I tell myself I love you is because I need to hear that. I need to hear myself say I love me, because in life, it's very hard, and I've always struggled loving myself. And now that I do love myself, I don't let anything or anyone stop me from loving myself. And life has been hard, but I'm happy to be alive. I just turned 26 recently. And I just turned 26 on the 17th. And when I turned 26, I was happy. I'm proud of myself. I quit drinking 11 months ago. And I'm happy and I'm proud of myself because at some point in my life, I didn't think I would make it to this point of being on panels, putting together my own drag marches and putting together my own shows and making all this art that I do and inspiring all these people around me. I didn't think I would get to this point. And now that I'm at this point in my life, nothing can stop me. I'm just going to keep going up. Life can only go up from here. And I'm just going to keep being me. And I just want y'all to know that y'all can be yourselves. And the other thing I was going to say is that seeing a trans person be herself is what helped me be myself. Before I came out as trans, I went to a rally. I went to a visual outside of City Hall in Milwaukee. I'm from Milwaukee. And I went to a visual outside of City Hall, and I saw this trans woman being herself. And me seeing her being herself made me realize, oh, I think that's who I am. I think I am that type of person. And just me seeing her be herself helped me be myself. And so I go out into the world every day being myself so that other trans people, especially trans youth, can see people like them and know that they can be whoever they want to and to not be afraid of it. And I want everybody out there who's listening or watching to remember to love yourself, be kind to yourself, and always be you. Never let anyone or anything stop you from being you. I love y'all.
Our final panelist is Barry. After earning a degree in wildlife education at UWSP, Barry returned to Madison to be closer with family and has actually become part of the First Baptist Church family and is involved with our handbell choir.
Hello, everyone. As John introduced, my name is Barry. I use they and he pronouns, and I am a 25-year-old non-binary transgender person, and I would like to share with you today my story of discovering that about myself and how I came to having this identity. I wouldn't say that I had a transgender childhood where I always knew. I was assigned female at birth, and while I feel that even though that's the gender I was assigned, that I've always been non-binary, really the first kind of feelings that I had when I was 5 were just that I'm uncomfortable with my name, but I didn't really hate the sort of feminine things that were imposed on me because of my gender. I liked dresses, I liked the color pink. Even liking those things though, I had a childhood where a lot of people probably saw me as a tomboy kind of kid. And I feel like I was very comfortable with myself when I was a very young child. It was more when puberty started to happen and my body began to change, I began to feel this discomfort with how it was changing. And I would start to wear clothing that was less feminine because I didn't like how that fit on my body. So I would start wearing maybe clothing that was a little more baggy or a little more masculine. But I actually didn't learn about being transgender and transgender people until I was much older. And I read a book that was written by a transgender man about his experience. And I really deeply related to how he felt about his body and how he felt about presenting masculine to the world and how his body was changed with hormones and with surgeries. And I wanted that for myself, but I didn't want to be a man. And so I didn't know where I fit in because I didn't really want to be a woman either. And really the only kind of transgender people at that point I learned about were transgender people that were men and transgender people that were women. There wasn't really any sort of in-between anyone ever explained to me or something different entirely. And I got lucky at this time of my life because I met someone, my partner of now 7 years, and she kind of gave me that first space where I could share that I was having these feelings with another person and talk about these feelings, and she met me with nothing but love and support and encouragement for these feelings, and that led me to go out and meet other transgender people and talk to other transgender people and learn that there were people out there that felt things very similar to me, and some of them called themselves non-binary. And that word really struck a chord within me. I just loved how expansive the identity of a non-binary could be. There wasn't this preset sort of expectation for non-binary people. We could look like anything, we could be anything. Really, men and women can look and be anything either, but just being able to say I'm non-binary, giving myself a word to say other than I'm a man or I'm a woman, felt incredibly freeing for me. And so with this, I picked the name for myself, Barry, and I started coming out to friends with they, them pronouns, and friends then became coworkers and at school, and then eventually I came out to my parents and my extended family. I'm very fortunate that most of my interactions with people in my life have been very positive, and I've had a lot of love come my way for people that accept me for who I am, even if they don't completely understand it or the pronouns are a bit tricky for them because not everyone's comfortable with they, them pronouns. But especially just getting that love from my parents and my partner and my partner's family when I made the decision 3 years ago to start hormones and when I got top surgery earlier this year. Having that support has really helped me develop my identity and develop my sense of belonging with them and with the greater transgender community. I still have issues where I will get misgendered by people. Some people see me and they just decide that they think that I'm a woman, that I use she, her pronouns. And over time, I've gotten very comfortable correcting people, but it just makes me wish that, like, they don't know my pronouns, they don't know who I am. It'd be nice if they could just use they, even if they don't know that that's a pronoun that I do enjoy having used about myself, that if they don't know me, a they, them would be so much nicer than a she or a ma'am. But no matter what happens in my life, no matter what people decide how I look and how they want to call me, that having the love and support of my family and my community, that I know who I am and I know what I'm comfortable with and I know how I'm comfortable having my body seen as and talked about, that it doesn't matter what other people say about me. And I hope that as I go through my life, I'm going to become more confident and more resilient and inspire that confidence and resilience within other people, regardless if they're trans or if they're cis, to use whatever language is most important to them, because it's about you and it's about how you feel and it's about what makes you love yourself most. Thank you.
I want to thank our panelists for taking the opportunity to share their stories with us. We are a church that I have learned in the past year that I've been here that is fighting for social justice. And I think that we as a church have to continue to have these conversations so that we can be the allies that the LGBTQ community needs. Until there is no more hatred, no more bigotry, and that we can understand that love is love. Right now, we're going to do a question and answer. If you have questions, raise your hand, and I will try to have someone pick them up from you. But we do have a couple that we're going to start off with, and we'll just kind of go through. Anyone can answer the question. If they do not feel comfortable answering it, then we will move on to the next question. The first question, yes. Oh, you're going to sit. The first question is, how did your family react when you came out to them as being transgender or non-binary?
I'll go first. When I came out to my family, I came out to them I came out to them as gay first, and they accepted me for that, and they supported me for that part. But then when I came out to them as trans, some of them supported me and some of them didn't. Like, I have some very toxic people in my family, unfortunately, and they didn't fully accept me. And then it's some people in my family who are understanding and willing to learn and get to know the real me. And most of the people in my family lead with love. And I know that some people in my family, when they misgender me or detonate me, they don't mean it out of hurtfulness. They mean it. They're saying that because that's what they're used to calling me. But when I correct them, they're willing to learn and move forward and understand that that's not the name I use anymore, and those aren't the pronouns I use anymore.
I have to remember to turn my mic on again. As I said, I came out to my sister, my brother, and my parents, and within the course of a little over a year and a half. My sister said that it didn't matter to her that I was a cross-dresser. She just wanted me to be happy. My brother was a little taken aback since I didn't prepare him ahead of time, and it was at a point when he was moving in with me so that he could get a job in Madison. So I sort of regret not giving him a little bit more warning before I came out to him. But now he's on board with it. It doesn't bother him in the least to see me walking around in a skirt and heels. My mom kind of made had the typical reaction that it was a phase I was going through. My dad had a little bit more empathy for what I was going through. But I think they both got used to the idea that I was going to be wearing feminine clothes from then on forward. Both my parents only saw me in a skirt once when my dad had to come down to UW Hospital for a follow-up medical appointment, and I had done a speakers panel right before that, so it was a little hard to go to the speakers panel dressed in a skirt and then have to change before I met my parents. So I just met my parents wearing a skirt and heels. My mom passed away in 2013, but my dad has seen me in a skirt once since then. But most of the time when I go up and stay with my dad for a weekend, I'm dressed, I think Barry used the term feminine casual. So I think that pretty much is an apt description of the wardrobe I wear when I go up and stay with my dad for the weekend.
Our next question is, how does your faith either help or hinder your transgender journey?
I guess as far as helping, I mean, for me, I think God embraces me for who I am. I don't think that God, it's very controversial, the place that especially Christian faith plays in the larger LGBT community, but also especially in the trans community. There's a whole large segment of the Christian community that sort of uses Christianity as a pretext to condemn folks in the LGBT and especially the trans community. And so a lot of us that are Christians and that are trans, we feel that pressure. We feel, even if it's not always explicit, we feel it. And many of us are just angry at Christians. We're because in the name of Christianity, many people come after us, and it's not even biblical. There are a few obscure messages in the Old Testament about being trans or being gay that probably are misused and out of context. But so in some ways, my faith complicates my trans journey. However, I know that God loves me. I know that God sees me for who I am, and I know that God values me deeply. And that is something that keeps me going often. And so I never seriously considered sort of setting aside my faith. So I guess that's how I would answer that. Morgan?
Yes, I guess I would just say quickly that I think it's true for most trans people that this is something that comes from inside. It's a feeling you have first and foremost before anything else. And it's not a feeling that we generate every day. All of us have thoughts and feelings that we participate in or we kind of trigger. And I don't feel that about this. I think this is very much something that comes from inside from everyone, no matter what we do. And I genuinely believe that we all, the people we in a creator, that creator made all of us. And to say that we're in that creator's image refers to everyone. And if you're not doing something that is wrong and hurtful to other people, then I very much see that as part of the plan, so to speak. So to me, I believe that every trans person is living exactly the way that God intended. And I believe, and I know for a fact, that when I transitioned, it brought me back to faith after having been a pretty militant atheist for a long time. So I can personally say that transitioning in and of itself was like turning a light switch back on and finding something again I thought I would never feel. And if my transition brought me back to faith, I don't see how transition and faith can be in conflict whatsoever.
Absolutely.
So for me, growing up, religion was a difficult thing. Growing up, I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and I went to the Kingdom Hall all the time. And that was very uncomfortable going there because at the Kingdom Hall and religion in general, it was always pushed in my head that being trans and being gay and being different was weird and not okay. And so growing up hearing these things, it made me hate myself. And at some point, I had to just step away from religion as a whole. When I became an adult, I said, I don't care about religion. Religion isn't for me. But as I grew up, as I got older, religion became a thing for me because I went into spaces that were welcoming, like this church and other churches and other spaces in the world that make us feel comfortable, that make us feel safe. Thank you to First Baptist Church for inviting me to be part of this and helping me and making me feel safe in this space. So yeah, religion at first was not a thing for me because I felt like religion hated me, so I hated religion. But over time, that view on religion changed because religion started to love me and help me be who I am. I'm done.
Next question. As an ally, what is the best way for us to handle witnessing someone being cruel or rude to a transgender person?
So I think I can speak to this. As an ally, especially as a cis person, you have the benefit in some ways of having more social sway in a situation. And I think in any situation, it's important to judge your own personal safety, and it's important to judge the escalation versus de-escalation of that situation. But I think that if you are seeing a trans person experiencing physical or emotional violence, that you can use your privilege, much as any person can help any marginalized identity by leveraging their privilege to step into that situation and try to de-escalate it. I would really emphasize de-escalation because the most important thing you can do in that situation is not make it about you and try and be the tough person who's trying to fix everything and look like the hero, but try to take the attention away from the trans person because they're probably already feeling extremely uncomfortable, very unsafe, and the best thing you can do is help them get away from that situation. So that would be my 2.
I agree with that. The one thing that I say about people being allies, for me, an ally isn't just a person who is supportive of the trans community, because for me, I'm not only trans, but I'm black, I'm queer, I'm trans, and I'm a woman. And so an ally for me is a person who supports all of those things, all of those parts of my identity. And an ally for me is a person who not only tells me that you're an ally, but show me that you're an ally. For example, if a situation happens where the police is interacting with me for whatever reason, I need you to show up and be there recording that incident that's happening. I need you to be there, step in front of me, so that it's you interacting with the police and not me. That's a way that you can show me that you're an ally to me. And just supporting me, uplifting me, making sure my voice can be heard, making sure that my face can be seen, my story can be told. Things like that. That's what an ally is to me.
The next question is, can you give a basic definition of non-binary, assuming that I am a 5-year-old?
Try to answer that one. It's really about just feeling whatever feels right for you. If you hear the word I'm non-binary and you say, well, I want to say that too, then you're non-binary. You don't have to do anything different. You don't have to change anything about yourself. It's all about just making you feel comfortable with the words that are being used about you. That's probably as simple as I can put it, but you can get, as creative with it as you want. If you want it to mean something very specific and very special to you, that's okay too.
I also identify as non-binary, and, oh, my mic is not on. It is on. I also identify as non-binary, and for me, non-binary means being who I am. Non-binary means expressing myself. Non-binary means not really caring about what other people think about me. Non-binary means to me being a unicorn, being magical. I think non-binary people and trans people in general are magical people, and magical, I think we're magical and we make the world a better place. And non-binary and trans people have always existed, and people need to know that. People need to know that we've always existed and that we're not going anywhere. And so when young people who identify as non-binary or trans see people like us being ourselves and not being afraid to be ourselves anymore, it gives me hope for this world. It gives me hope knowing that the world is becoming a better place for young trans people to be themselves and not be afraid of it.
I am a binary trans woman, but I once heard something that I think may be of use here, but correct me if I'm wrong. But my friend described it very much as, for most of us, we're all trans, whether we're binary or non-binary. Not everyone, but most of us identify as trans. And if transition is feeling uncomfortable with how you were assigned at birth, transition is moving in some way from that to something else. It's like that Latin prefix that I talked about earlier of on the same side as or across from. And to be non-binary is still a transition, but it's maybe a transition towards something that isn't as rigid and as typical as most of us have traditionally thought of gender.
The next question is, if I am talking to a common friend and want to correct who the person I'm talking to once knew with who our common friend is now, can I say their dead name?
No.
No.
No, you cannot. No, you cannot say someone's dead name. That's disrespectful and rude and not appropriate. Even if you know that person's dead name, you should never say it. Like, that person doesn't identify as that name anymore. And that person doesn't identify as that name anymore. And, like, it's just, it's not okay. And, like, personally, I don't never want anyone who knows me, who knew me back then, who knows me now, to ever refer to me as my dead name, because that name isn't mine anymore. That name doesn't belong to me anymore, and it's not who I am. Legally, that's still my name, but it's not who I am, it's not who I identify as, and it's just disrespectful to even think it's okay for you to say a person's dead name. I've had situations where someone has called me by my dead name and it wasn't okay, and a friend showed me that they were my ally by stepping in and talking to that person and saying, hey, that was wrong and disrespectful, don't do it again. And yeah, but that's all I have to say.
I would add as well that it's retroactive. So it's not just important to never use a person's dead name. And if you do, accidents happen, just minimize it. Don't draw attention to it. Try and erase it from people's memories. Just move on and replace with the correct name. But it should be retroactive. So if someone tells you who they are, they've always been that person. So it's not like you were this person then and you're this person now. And this has been personally a big problem for me, that I've had people who I thought loved me, but they see this as something new. And it's not. This is something that we have always been. And so, I don't see myself as a little boy who grew up to be a woman. I see myself as a woman who was a little girl and everyone just ignored it or didn't know. And that name never was comfortable with me. And it took me a long time to say it. And so to show me or any of us that respect is to work, even if it's hard, to gender with pronouns and name correctly people, even in the past when you're talking about them, even if it's your child, even if it's family. So
Another thing I was going to say is that even if, when you're talking to someone about someone else and that person happens to be your friend that you're talking about, if you don't know what that person's pronouns are nowadays, just use they, them pronouns. I would rather you use they, them pronouns to address me and talk about me to someone else than to use he, him pronouns to refer to me. Because I would rather you use they, them pronouns than to assume what my pronouns are. If you don't know what someone's pronouns are, use they, them pronouns. And then learn what that person's pronouns are. And also, if you are talking about a person and you mess up their pronouns, just correct yourself and move forward. Don't make a big deal out of it. Because if you make a big deal out of it, it's just going to get awkward and it's going to cause more problems. Like, I've had situations where I work at a restaurant, and so I get misgendered a lot, all the time. One time I was on the phone and somebody said, "Thank you, sir." And I said, "I'm not a sir, you're welcome." But what I wanted to say, I'm petty sometimes, so what I wanted to say back to him was, "You're welcome, ma'am. I'm not a sir." But I was like, no, I can't do that because I wouldn't want someone misgendering me, so it's not okay for me to misgender someone else. And I said back to him, "You're welcome, sir." I'm not a sir. And he said back to me, I'm sir. And I forgot what I was about to say. I'm going off on a tangent now. I'm done for now.
This is the last question that we have. Is having gender dysphoria the same thing as being trans? It was in one of your slides, Morgan.
Okay, absolutely not. So this is one of the most important things is how being trans has been traditionally framed in psychiatric and medical literature. So I think that Rhiannon mentioned that being trans is not a mental illness, and that's not just hearsay, that is medical fact. So in the DSM, we are not listed as a mental illness. However, for reasons of health coverage, dysphoria is. And what dysphoria is like I said before, a cognitive experience. It's a feeling, a very negative feeling. When your body or your presentation don't match how you view yourself in your head. And that is often the engine or the driving force behind people medically transitioning. There's so much discomfort that changing yourself can alleviate that. But that is not true for all trans people. Many trans people, and very often many non-binary people, enjoy things about the birth sex assigned, and it may not feel discomfort at all. And traditionally, that's been a big problem in seeking coverage for surgeries, or even being recognized as trans to get on hormones, is that we have this narrative that we all hate our bodies and we're so miserable, and we have to go through this rigid process in order to alleviate that pain. And that is true for some people. That was true for me in many respects. But for many people, it's not that they experience discomfort, it's just that they experience more happiness with something else. And so I liken it very much to the reasons that we want to move houses, right? Everybody moves for a different reason. There's different necessities for moving into a different house or apartment. Some people do it because we hate the apartment or house that we're currently in. It's just not livable. It is, the sink doesn't work, this or that. Other people liked the place they were in. It was a nice place, but it wasn't the forever place, right? And bodies are like a house, okay? And brains are like a house. And there's different reasons to move or to transition in this analogy. Some of us have an unlivable situation and we have to transition for those reasons. Other people, it's just not the right fit. It's not that they hate the house they were in, it's just not the right fit. So dysphoria is not a prerequisite for being trans. And that is a huge problem because that is what keeps us often from getting medical help, is because that is in the medical literature traditionally until recently, that you need to meet those prerequisites for dysphoria to transition, and it's gatekeeping a lot of people. It's a big problem. Okay.
So I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank our panelists. This has been an amazing event that I hope that we can continue to do on a yearly basis with the Trans Day of Remembrance events, because these are the conversations that we as allies need to hear. These are the conversations that we need to make sure that we know what to do to stand up with our trans siblings in this world. So I want to thank everyone, and I want to thank you all also for attending. Thank you.